Hello, I'm the Dark Master, and welcome back to the Kirby Right Back at You Retrospective. In today's installment of the Retrospective, we shall be covering episode 71, A Whale of a Tale, or as it's called in the Japanese original, Close Contact, Whale Watching. Alright, so this episode was originally released in Japan on February 22nd, 2003. The English dub, handled by the infamous 4Kids, was released on April 24th, 2004. This episode, due to its name, involves a whale, and has luckily very few changes between versions, but let's get right into it, starting with, of course, as always, we do in these reviews, the story of the episode. The episode opens to a panning shot on a rocky coast near Cappytown, where we see Kirby, Tiff, and Tuff fishing. Tuff casts his line out. Kine, the oceanic sunfish, which is a distinct species not related to the freshwater one, and is a character introduced in Kirby's Dream Land 2, which I have reviewed in the past if you'd like to learn more about that game, as well as where Kine came from. We see him rightfully horrified as the lure lands near him. Tuff points him out as Tiff says that he should be careful out here, lest he end up on someone's dinner plate. He asks her not to talk about that as it frightens him and describes a nightmare and how he was served alongside a side of fries. Tiff then explains that it is just nature for species to eat other species. Kine asks if that would happen if someone caught him, which is, harsh, but the truth. And then what Tuff says causes Kine to freak out. Interestingly, Kirby then says Shushi Puyo. Usually the dub removed such, useless Kirby talking, so it's kind of fascinating to see it left in. Personally, I don't like Kirby talking all that much, but I don't know, it's fine here. The conversation is cut short, however, as we see a massive creature emerge from the water, which creates a massive wave that knocks Kine back and hits the kids, as is then seen diving back when it's revealed to have been a whale. Since this whale is the closest thing to a character of the week, plus this episode lacks both a copy ability or a monster of the week, let us talk about it for a bit. Now, this whale is clearly modeled after the real-life sperm whale Physeter macrocephalus, the last member of its genus and one of only 3 species in its family in real life. They grow to a maximum length of 59 feet long and 70 metric tons in weight. Of course, the whale in this episode is way bigger than that, as we shall see in a bit. I think it could swallow a real-life sperm whale in one whole bite. It's massive. While definitely exaggerated, there's actually a precedent for this, as the group that includes the, sperm whale was far more diverse back in the Miocene, with many genre-feeling niches akin to dolphins and orcas, such as the massive predator Leviathan. While it's unlikely that the animation, workers on this show or the planners really had any of this in mind, I like how much it synergizes with real life, and it shows a great deal of care Nintendo had when making this whale. It is also here that we see the first of only 3 big changes between versions. In the Japanese original, the sounds that the whale makes are human voice acted, kind of like the sheep. Meanwhile, the English dub utilizes actual whale recordings for once. A change that I think the English dub in the end was good to do for once, which is not very common. In the end, the whale dives. We then cut to the jazzy intro. After the jazzy intro, we cut back to the townsfolk watching the massive whale swim around in the harbor. Bookums is amazed at its sheer size while the mayor asks what it is. Tiff then explains that it is a whale, pointing out that actually whales are a mammal that breathes through a blowhole as opposed to a water like an actual fish. Curio is fascinated. Tuff points out how even Kirby couldn't inhale it if he wanted to, while Kawasaki points out that its flesh is in such large quantities, enough to feed the whole town, which Tiff lambasts him for, as that, you know, suggesting such a thing is very horrible, and Kawasaki quickly apologizes. He's saying that he hadn't gotten any lunch, as if that's an excuse. Honey then says that it sure is big, while Spikehead wonders why it's here. Kine then shows up and provides some explanation and explains that underwater there's been rumors of a whale that lost its baby recently. Tiff points out how that's interesting, as Tuff says that this whale must be the mom looking for its baby. We see the whale swim around as Honey asks how it'll find its baby. Tiff explains that whales talk/communicate underwater using echolocation, aka a signal of sound. The mayor, Len Blustergas's wife, says that that's lovely. We then see a large cruise-style vessel arrive. Tiff is very skeptical, while the others are amazed. Tuff points out how it's approaching as we see the boat come into port. Dedede Escargoon come out as they announce their new venture for whale watching. He even says it'll be free, which is unusually generous given how often he likes to take money from other people. Escargoon explains it's a chance to see a whale up close. Tiff is against this, saying that he could scare the animal away. The king says that there's no way someone as small as him could scare a whale, which is, simply not true. Tiff calls him out on that position, saying that the whale is looking for her baby, which Escargoon says could be neat to watch. Police Chief Bookham says it could be neat while his wife goes on to agree with his position. Rashikiri says it could be of interest of scientific, importance. The mayor then asks if anyone wants to go on a whale watching trip, and they all agree, heading off. Tiff tries to, get the people to stop, but she is unsuccessful and almost gets pushed into the water as her brother and Kirby rush by to get on the boat. We see Kawasaki, while getting on, suggest Tiff become their whale guide, as Kyoto adds on, saying they could be a unique learning experience, as the Cappy Kid, Spikehead, and Honey point out how she knows more about whales than anyone else. She thinks it over as Edie says that she's out of time and prepares to head off. Escargoon sets off, and in the end, Tiff decides to join, running up the ramp as we see her getting on the boat. The boat is seen following after the whale as we see a shot of the townsfolk watching the whale swim. Dedede, like a rude tourist, pushes all of these people aside as he gets a camera to take photos of the whale, which swims by. He complains about how he wants the whale to do something interesting to photograph. Escargoon snarks that at least he's picking on someone his own size. The whale ignores the king, but gets up, which the king arrogantly takes this as proof that it listened to him, which Escargoon just rolls his eyes out due to, knowing that that's not the case. The townsfolk are amazed as Dedede tells his crew to get closer. The sniveling snail says that it could attack him before telling his crew to go ahead. We see Tiff and Kirby watching as well as Tuff. Tuff tells the pink puffball that this ship is cool, and they go to look down in the ship's hull, going past Tiff. She hears Kine calling her name, and he's surprised that she's here. And Tiff explains that she didn't really want to be here, but figured it was a good idea to tag along, before asking the fish if he saw the baby whale, which he says not yet. Tiff then says it must still be looking for its mother, and says if they find them, they could reunite the pair, and Kine goes back to looking around underwater. We cut to Tuff and Kirby exploring the inner ship. They see Waddle-Doo leaving a room, telling some group to be on guard as the king will give a signal very soon. As he passes by, we see Tuff and Kirby emerge from a shadowy corner, who go into the room, peeking into it and revealing a room filled with whaling stuff. Tuff points out the obvious, as the king is probably trying to catch the whale. The two go inside for a closer look. Sneaky at first, we see Kirby wander away, looking at an unusual lure modeled after King Dedede. What is that for? He goes to play with it, breaking it, and despite Tuff trying to stop him, which alerts the Waddle-Dees to their presence, they try to escape but are cornered by Waddle-Doo. The boy tries to explain himself, but Waddle-Doo is having none of it and surrounds the two kids with spears. We cut back to the tourists and see the boat has gotten unusually close to the whale. Tiff calls the king out for this, endangering the poor creature as well as the people on board. Escargoon dismisses her, saying that the whale can just dive away if it doesn't like it, with Deity saying it's better to get pictures with. Tiff rightfully points out how it can't dive as it's, too shallow in the lagoon. The king says that's all right, as if it dove away, it would hurt their cruise, as Escargoon points out how they want to give the people an up-close experience. Tiff sardonically asks how up-close can they get, sarcastically suggesting a tour inside their stomach next. Foreshadowing is a large literary concept that we shall see later on, as the two, goober villains laugh at the suggestion. The whale breathes out, showering the group watching with wet air. This confuses the group as Tiff explains that the whale is exhaling, as, unlike fish, they breathe air, not water. They continue to get closer, Dedede saying he'll make the cover of National Geographic, which implies that the magazine exists in the world of Kirby, and Dedede is probably a better, photographer than some of the recent issues they had. It's kind of a shame they died, but it's also their own fault. They bump into the whale, much to Tiff's chagrin. They attempt to follow it as the whale, in pain, tries to dive to escape, but can't, and Tiff tells him to stop chasing her, but Dedede tells the crew not to lose the whale, and they follow the whale, who then dives in dismay. We then cut to inside the ship where Kirby and Tuff have been bound up. Kirby is biting at the rope under the boy's instruction to try and get them free. Tuff tells him to hurry, so I gotta warn Tiff. The whale then, rams the boat, sending Cappies and Dedede fleeing, as well as shaking Tuff and Kirby around. This leads to a sharp torpedo breaking off from the wall, which rolls over to the pair, and Tuff uses the, edge to cut his cords. We then cut back to the deck, where the whale is attacking the ship. Gus says it must be trying to sink it, and the king says that the whale is a menace and must be put in jail. Escargoon says they must catch it. Tuff, however, comes out and calls him out with them on buff. His sister is confused by this and asks what is going on. Tuff says that the king's got equipment for catching a whale, which horrifies Tiff. Realizing the gig is up, the king reveals the truth as Escargoon presses a button and the ship transforms into a sinister whaling ship. Tiff points out the obvious as Daisy crawls up to the crow's nest. The whale sinks into the ocean as the king wonders where it went. As Tiff points out, it's coming up from behind as the whale emerges, mouth open, and swallows everyone as people scream. And Kirby looks up at the whale, just completely confused at what is going on as the whale swallows the entire ship. And keep in mind, this is a large ship. Like, it's meant to be on par with a cruise ship, so yeah, pretty big. The darkness cloaks everyone until Tiff turns on a hand lamp. We also see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, you can hear the faint breathing and heartbeat in the background. As it sounds pretty ominous, it does give a sort of atmospheric vibe. 4Kids, for unknown reasons, removed this, which is a big shame, as I think it just hurts the feeling of the scene. We see everyone is crowded around the children. Waddledoos assures everyone that the king is okay, which no one really cares about, as Bookham says that everyone else is okay as well, which is much more important. The mayor must have short-term memory loss, as he asks where is he. To which Tiff says that they are quite obviously in the whale's stomach. Don't know what happened to the ship, though. Sort of like Jonah and the whale from the Bible, but on a whole other level. Kawasaki then says that they're the food, as Professor Kiryu says he had a gut feeling that this was the case. Dedede snatches the lamp from Tiff, saying that they gotta find a way out of here, as Esakun yells at Tiff to help them out. Of course she refuses, which Dedede deserves this treatment, but when it becomes evident that there's a lot of other innocent people here, and after some pathetic sniveling from Escargoon and Dedede, Tiff relents and leads the group as they walk around, eventually coming to a stop suddenly. The king asks what is going on, as Tiff points out some massive piles of garbage. The group comment on it, Kawasaki asking where it came from, as Tiff explains that they've been treating the oceans as a dumping ground, and if they don't do anything, the ocean will be nothing more than a junkyard. We see Kine show up, who apparently there's enough water for him to survive in. Tiff asks what happened to him, and he explains that he managed to get in as he swam in as the whale swallowed everyone else up. Tiff asks him if he can help them get out. He agrees to talk to the whale. Tiff says of them that if the whale lets them out, they will clean the garbage out of the whale's stomach. She then says that they can't just leave the garbage here. The police chief Bookham admits that he has a point, as the mayor says it's part of their civic duty. We see Kine and the whale are then seen swimming through the water as some time has passed and the group has fallen asleep. Tuff asks if the whale will let them out, to which his sister says only if the whale accepts the deal. The mayor says that he hopes this happens, or Kiryu says it's their only hope. This conversation comes to an end, however, as light appears as the whale opens its mouth on the beach, as everyone cheers on the deal going through. The group tries to leave, but Tiff calls them out and says that they have to hold up their end of the deal, and the group begins to reluctantly remove all of the trash. Dedede and Escargoon smile maliciously as we see them taking all the trash out as Kirby floats by on a life preserver. Tiff, notices this and asks if they can look for the whale baby while they're busy cleaning out the trash. Kine and Kirby head out as we then see Tiff speak to the whale, explaining that they'll find her baby and clean the trash out. We see the townsfolk finishing up with the garbage. The mayor says it's a lot, while Bookham says that littering on this scale should be illegal. His wife points out rightfully that this is not all the trash from their village, and Kawasaki points out how it's unfair that they have to clean up what other people had littered into the ocean. The mayor agrees with this, and Bookham says that it may be a pain in the neck, but they can't just leave it here. Suddenly the king appears and agrees with what Bookham says, saying that he'll clean up the trash for them, with Escargoon offering to recycle it, and the townsfolk agree, as Dedede and Escargoon smirk at their, blatant trickery. We then cut to Kine and Kirby, who are looking for the whale baby. Kine asks him if he sees anything. Kirby floats up into the air, which is something that the anime doesn't often depict, so that's kind of cool to see. He sees an island and informs Kine as both go over to investigate it. We cut back to the whale as Tiff and the Cappy kids finish getting the last of the trash out. Tough comments on how the whale likely feels much better, which Tiff agrees with, but are called on by the girl Honey. Tiff runs over and asks what the issue is, as the young Cappy girl explains that everyone is gone, as is the trash, which astounds Tiff. This astoundingment is cut short as Dee laughs, and the group turns around, and it's revealed that the king has recycled all of that garbage into a sort of giant harness to turn the whale into a sort of bio-organic submarine. Which, when I word it like that, sounds very H.R. Geiger-like. Don't worry, it's not that bad. It is here that we see that last change between versions. Of the Japanese original, the whale harness submarine is called the HMS Gnaw Litter. In addition to being a reference to being made out of litter, it is also an allusion to the first nuclear power submarine, the USS Nautilus, which is especially funny in Japan as the Japanese word primitive and nuclear are pronounced the same. Doesn't quite work in the English version, but I still think it's a shame that the English dub completely remove it, as the USS Nautilus is a, US ship, and I think that they could get the reference well enough for it is. I also have to say that, it's quite impressive that they were able to build this fast, and really shows that Escargoon is a lot more competent, and that the king doesn't necessarily only have to rely on monsters, which is something we don't see a lot. Tiff demands an explanation as the two evildoers explain that it was their idea to turn the whale into a weapon. Tiff calls this out, as does her brother. The two evildoers, dedede and Escargoon, then laugh, going into the harness. Determined to stop this animal abuse, Tiff, Tough, Iroh, Spike, and Honey run to the whale. As we cut to inside the harness, which, much like the TARDIS, seems bigger on the inside than the outside, as it has a whole submarine array, as the king tells the crew to set off, as we see the harness force the whale into the waters. It's interesting that this whale is able to beach and unbeach itself at will, surprisingly easy. If only real-life whales could do this, there would be a lot less tragic deaths, but Escargoon takes off as we cut outside to Tiff and the others entering into the harness itself. The girl confronts the king, telling them to stop this. The king looks up at her. Instead of just, kicking her out, as they could very easily do so, the king mocks her as Escargoon, lets her watch as he tells her that the whale is now part of the Royal Navy. The whale dives in pain beneath the waves. Waddle-Doo alerts them of an object on the radar, which, under the king's instruction, Escargoon dodges easily. They dodge another rock, but get confused when there are multiple ones, and they bump into numerous rocks. Lights flash red as everyone is sent, being all over the place as the whole harness bumps and bruises. Escargoon struggles to regain control. Tiff tries to help, but it's no use as they run into other rocks before everyone slowly floats up to the surface, battered and bruised, especially the war whale. We see Kirby and Kine come over, calling to Tiff. Sensing an opportunity, dedede perks up and orders his crew to shoot at the pair. This annoys Tough, but he can do nothing as Waddle-Dees fire, torpedoes at them as Escargoon tells them to fire, and they do so. Tough and Tiff look shocked as Tiff tries to warn them as Kine panics and luckily avoids the admittedly okay CGI looking missiles, which then hit the nearby island. Escargoon says that it was a bullseye, but the king counters saying that they were supposed to hit Kirby, not the island. Kine, however, says that is no island, which confuses the group as it begins to move, and a massive tidal wave emerges, smothering the group. They try to crawl in, but sadly only Tiff and the other kids manage to get in, as the harness breaks off the whale. Luckily, it floats, and we see Tiff, the others, and even Kine have all ended safe, if a bit roughed up. The kid and Askargoon are not so lucky and have been thrown overboard. Sadly, they don't drown and instead are scared of the whale's wrath. They swim away to the nearby island. The king, after doing so, complains about how he's now been stuck on an island. But it then moves again and it's revealed to be the mother whale, which is huge. This might seem a bit random, but it's actually a reference to a classical scenario seen in a lot of historical, religions, such as the Greeks. They had a sort of mythology that there were certain turtles that would grow so large as to resemble islands, but the second somebody got on there, they would dive down deep. We also saw this in Tolkien Legendarium with the Fasticon, but anyway, the king, being very stupid, asks what is going on, to which Tiff says that he's taken whale watching to a whole other level. The mother whale bounces the two goobers off her back, which then land on her blowhole. She blows them as they try to hold on for dear life before being blasted away again like Team Rocket. The two whales reunite, mother and child. Tuff says it's so nice, and Tiff is happy as the Cappy kids and Kirby jump in joy. And the two whales leave the area, as Tiff says that if one shows nature respect, there's no telling what one can learn. As Kirby jumps into the sky and we see the end of the episode. Now let's cover the positives, negatives, and my final thoughts in this episode. Starting with the positives, I have to say I found all the characters in this episode really well done. Dedede's opportunism, even if a bit, random at times, was really fun to see, as was him getting his just desserts in the end. Tiff also is, very enjoyable as we see Kine again, and that's cool too. I also have to say that I enjoy the theme of this episode. Though, yes, the anime has explored environmental themes in countless previous episodes that I've reviewed before, but again, I think manages to avoid repetition by focusing on a new subtopic: whale issues. Speaking of the whale itself, it's just amazing, as I think it manages to take aspects of a real animal and alter it to fit within a more fantastical world. Yes, of course, no whale actually gets this big, and obviously a whale can't really beach and unbeach itself, but a whale in Kirby universe probably would be able to do that. In fact, did you know that there was a whale in the original Kirby's Dream Land, which I've reviewed in the past? So there's actually a deeper connection here than you might think. Admittedly, I have to say though that this theme hasn't quite the same timelessness as the others, because whaling, even when this episode was originally aired, was mostly dead outside of some small number caught by like the Japanese and indigenous peoples, like the Eskimos, which for some reason people are able to excuse. It's kind of weird how certain groups of people can still do something, but others can't. Just seems kind of weird. If I could make an analogy, it's sort of like how in Avatar 2, The Way of Water, it was way less timeless than in the original Avatar movie, where it's just more about, a general eco, theme. And unfortunately, that's sort of the risk you run when you cover more specific topics. They just don't age as well as more generalized ones. And as you can probably tell, now we gotta sadly talk about some of the true negatives that I and maybe a few others have. The censorship done by 4Kids, while minor, was still one of the negatives of the episode, even if only in a minor way, as I always find those sorts of things rather distasteful. For other people, I would also say that the lack of a copy ability or a monster does make the episode a little more forgettable than it would have been otherwise, but I still think it's solid without one. I've also heard some people complain that it's too similar to Free Willy, which was a 1993 family film involving an orca named Willy. But outside of both involving whales, I don't really see much similarity between the two. Before I go into my final thoughts, I think I'd like to point out that this episode marked the last time that the Kirby March theme, performed by Zhang Hu and composed by Akira Miyagana, would play in the Japanese original. Going forward, it was replaced by Kirby with a exclamation mark, a song composed by Katsudo Sato and sung by Hiroko Asakawa. Rather random change that I don't quite understand why this episode was the marking point, nor do I really understand why it was changed, as this doesn't really mark the end of a season or really anything notable. Maybe it was like a rights issue, but I don't really know why this was changed. Back to my final thoughts as to what I think of this episode. I have to say I enjoyed revisiting this episode. It's nothing amazing and also nothing horrible either. A perfect mouth cleaner from the wretched aftertaste that Decory gave us in the last episode review. Overall, not a must watch, and you could easily skip it if you so wish, but I think you'd be robbing yourself of a fine time. A perfectly good episode that is, good for what it is. I'm the Dark Master. If you liked this video, like it, but if you loved it, consider liking and subscribing. And join me next time on the Kirby Right Back at Ya Retrospective. And take care. Have a wonderful day.